You can either accept the 40% pay cut, or you can pack your things and leave. That was how my Tuesday started. Not with a warning, not even a conversation, just a printed memo handed to me across the conference table like a cheap receipt, one I was expected to sign without blinking. My name is Elodie. I'm 34, and until that moment, I had been a senior financial analyst at Avaria Tech for over 8 years. I had walked into that company as a wide-eyed junior who stayed late, never missed a deadline, and even once helped rewrite our entire forecasting model during a product crisis. I believed in hard work, in loyalty. I believed in them. But the truth was, they had stopped believing in me long before I noticed. Avara was one of those sleek tech startups that had grown too fast for its own good. Buzzwords in every hallway, overpriced cold brews in the fridge, and investors who only cared about quarterly surges. On paper, it looked like we were thriving. But behind the glossy branding and Instagrammable office perks, things were starting to rot. And I knew. I had been noticing odd inconsistencies in our internal ledgers, vendor payouts that didn't match invoice records, slush fund entries buried in budget allocations that didn't exist a month ago. At first, I thought I was imagining it. After all, I wasn't in charge of audits. But the numbers had started whispering something, and the whispers were turning into screams. Then came that memo. My direct manager, Travis, smug in his tailored suit and thinly veiled condescension, sat across from me with a rehearsed expression of fake concern. "This isn't personal," he said. "It's just a necessary recalibration of our workforce." I wanted to laugh. They were recalibrating me right out of my job because I wasn't silent. I had asked questions. Too many. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I'll need some time to think about it." He smirked, already thinking he'd won. I walked out of that room with the memo still in my hand. My stomach was in knots, but my mind was clear. Something inside me clicked. Not out of anger, not yet, but out of something deeper, a quiet knowing that this wasn't just about me. Over the next few hours, no one in the office spoke to me. A few glanced up from their desks as I walked by, their faces tight with discomfort. I guess silence was safer. I went back to my desk and opened my private spreadsheet, a quiet archive of everything I had been tracking: irregular vendor payments, shadow bonuses, salary mismatches. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I opened a blank email, addressed it to my personal account. The subject line, "If anything happens to me, read this." And then I hit send. Because somewhere deep in my gut, I knew this wasn't the end of my job. It was the beginning of a war. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid. I'd already crossed that threshold. But because the silence had started to hum inside me like a warning siren I couldn't shut off. I kept hearing Travis's voice, that condescending calm, as if I was just another line item on his expense sheet. The next morning, I returned to work without a word. I didn't respond to the HR email reminding me about the deadline to accept the revised offer. I didn't answer this ping from Travis's assistant asking to check in. I just logged in, sipped my lukewarm coffee, and waited. By noon, the change became visible. My login access to the central ledger was revoked. Files I'd worked on for years were now marked restricted. The dashboards I'd built, maintained, improved, they were locked. No warning, no explanation. Just cut off. It was surgical. And everyone around me knew. I could see it in how their eyes darted away when I looked up, how casual conversations stopped when I walked into the kitchen. Even the interns, who used to come to me for advice, now avoided my desk like it was radioactive. The worst part? No one said a thing. No, "Hey, are you okay?" No, "What's going on?" Just the rustle of keyboards and the occasional fake cough trying to fill the void. I had never felt so alone in a place I had helped build. 8 years of commitment reduced to a hallway ghost. And yet, I stayed. Every day, I showed up. I smiled politely. I took meeting notes like a good little soldier. I let them think I was defeated. Because silence? It can be a weapon, too. What they didn't know was that every evening I took the long way home, not to avoid traffic, but to stop by the public library. There, I used a computer that wasn't connected to our network, logged into a private email account, and began cross-referencing vendor payments with state contractor registries. It didn't take long before things stopped adding up. There were payments going out to vendors that weren't legally registered in the state. Consulting fees issued to shell LLCs tied to a residential address in another city. And then there were the salaries, dozens of employees listed at adjusted pay rates far below legal minimum, under the guise of equity packages that had never been filed. They weren't just trimming costs, they were laundering. That's when the guilt hit me. Not fear, guilt. Because I had seen the cracks forming months ago. I had felt it. I had chosen to look away. Maybe it was because I didn't want to believe it. Or maybe I was just tired of always being the one to speak up, only to be told I was too intense or not a team player. But not this time. This time, I wasn't going to warn them. I was going to watch them burn. I printed everything: names, invoices, wire transfers, emails. I didn't rush. I labeled each file, sorted the evidence. And then, one night, after confirming every detail, I made the decision that changed everything. I picked up my phone, dialed a number that had been sitting in my notes for weeks, and when the voice answered, calm and official, I said, "Hi, I'd like to report a case of corporate fraud and wage theft. I have documents to prove it." I thought I'd feel relief after making the call. Vindication, maybe. Some small sense of control. Instead, I felt nothing. Not emptiness, just a stillness, like that second of silence before thunder cracks open the sky. I stared at my phone for a long time after hanging up, expecting something to happen. An email, a knock, a text from someone who somehow knew. But there was nothing. The next few days were oddly normal. Too normal. I kept going to work, slipping into the role of the woman who'd given up. The one they'd already started erasing. I played my part well, until Thursday morning. That's when the first tremor hit. I walked into the office and immediately sensed it, an energy shift. The front desk was unusually quiet. Our office manager, usually glued to her phone, was talking in hushed tones to a man in a dark blazer. A man I didn't recognize. I passed by slowly. His badge read, Labor Department, Division of Enforcement. My heart leapt. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to pretend I was just another cog, unaware of the storm gathering above my head. But God, I was shaking inside. They were here. It was real. By noon, 3 more officials had arrived. They carried laptops, clipboards, and that eerie sense of purpose that only government agents seem to possess. One by one, department heads were pulled into conference rooms. Not me. No one called my name. I kept typing at my desk, pretending to focus, my fingers trembling against the keyboard. My co-workers were on edge too, half of them whispering in Slack channels, the other half just avoiding eye contact altogether. And then, Travis stormed past me, his face pale, jaw tight. He didn't look at me. That was when I knew. He felt it. And yet, I had to keep waiting. It wasn't until the following Monday that I received the message I'd been holding my breath for. An encrypted email from the Department of Labor. They wanted to meet. With me, privately. That night, I sat in a coffee shop far from the city, heart pounding as I reread the email. I was being asked to serve as a confidential informant. Not just a whistleblower, a cooperating witness in an ongoing federal investigation into wage theft, labor exploitation, and fraudulent financial reporting. Too much? Yes. Overwhelming? Absolutely. But deep down, I felt something else too. Finally, someone was listening. The next day, I met with the lead investigator in a discreet office building across town. She was sharp, calm, and didn't waste time with niceties. "You're not the first person to file a complaint," she said quietly, "but you are the first with this level of documentation." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Wait, there were others? That's when the real shock came in. 3 other employees had attempted to report Avara in the past year. 2 were dismissed without warning. 1, someone from HR, simply vanished, her exit labeled family emergency. No one ever asked questions, too disappointing for words. But this time, they said, was different. Because this time, the case had teeth. My evidence, meticulously organized, cross-verified, and time-stamped, was now the backbone of the investigation. They would be issuing formal subpoenas within days. And soon, there would be a financial audit. A real one. I couldn't believe it. After months of being ignored, pushed aside, treated like nothing, I was now the center of the storm. Not by choice, but by necessity. The truth I had been quietly collecting was about to blow a multi-million-dollar company wide open. And still, I had to go back to work. I had to walk into that building every day, past the people who'd written me off, sit at my desk like nothing had changed, all while knowing everything was about to. And I did it. But inside me, something was shifting. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Not just at Travis, not just at the company, but at the entire structure that made it so easy for people like them to thrive, while people like me were forced to choose between silence and survival. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn to finish it. The week that followed was a masterclass in corporate chaos. Subpoenas were issued quietly, but their effect echoed loudly across every floor. Teams were told to archive documents, but access to shared drives mysteriously froze. One department head took a sudden leave. 2 others resigned without a word. And Travis? He was unraveling. I watched it happen in real time. His posture, once arrogant and upright, had collapsed into something jittery. His voice cracked more than once in meetings. I caught him pacing the hallway outside the legal team's office, phone clutched to his ear, forehead beaded with sweat. I should have felt satisfied. But strangely, I didn't. No one wins when integrity dies this slowly. Still, I stayed in character. I was the quiet, broken employee who kept her head down. I followed instructions. I submitted empty reports. I showed up and smiled just enough to seem forgettable. But I was far from done. There was one final piece missing. Something to link Travis personally to the violations. Something irrefutable. The investigators had the framework, but I needed the trigger. And then, almost stupidly, he gave it to me. Late one evening, as the office emptied out and the quiet settled in, I received an email. It was sent to a small internal distribution list of senior analysts, including me, though I was no longer technically part of that group. Maybe he forgot, or maybe he assumed I'd ignore it. But I didn't. The subject line was innocuous, regarding Q3 disbursement adjustments. The email itself, however, was damning. Travis outlined a plan to reallocate consultant bonuses to discretionary channels in order to soften audit exposure before investor reviews. He even attached a spreadsheet, my spreadsheet, the one I'd created over a year ago, but now doctored with fabricated vendor entries. Too outrageous. Too blatant. I blinked twice reading it. Was he really this sloppy now? Or just this desperate? I forwarded the message to the investigator that night, along with the original, unaltered version of the spreadsheet for comparison. She replied within minutes. This is it. It hit me then, hard. This was the endgame, not just of the company, not just of Travis, but of the version of me that used to second-guess everything, my voice, my instincts, my worth. The next morning, I walked into the office with a different kind of silence in me. Not the silence of fear, but of resolve. Around 11 a.m., word spread. A federal team had arrived at headquarters. This time, they weren't asking questions. They were taking files. Dozens of employees were pulled aside. Laptops were boxed. Phones were confiscated. And Travis? He never made it past the front door. Security stopped him in the lobby. I watched from the second floor as he argued, flailed, turned red, and was finally led out by two agents. Too surreal, too satisfying. He had walked through those doors every day believing he was untouchable. Now they barely let him walk out. No one looked at me. No one had to. I packed up my things quietly that afternoon. My resignation letter was short. No drama, no farewell emails, just closure. Because the company was collapsing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. I didn't cry, not when I handed in my badge, not when I walked out of the building I'd spent 8 years inside, not even when I dropped my company laptop off at the front desk and saw the receptionist, normally chatty and bright, avoid my eyes completely. But I did pause at the revolving doors. For just a moment, I stood there, hand resting on the cool glass, and breathed in the weight of it all. Not just the end of a job, but the end of a version of me that had tolerated, endured, and rationalized far too much for far too long. God, I stayed too long. It hit me like a delayed wave. All the missed signs, the silent betrayals, the fake smiles I forced just to survive. And still, I kept showing up. I walked out into the sunlight with nothing but a small box of things and an even smaller idea of what would come next. The days that followed were quiet. Too quiet. I slept in. I drank my coffee slowly. I reread old journal entries, almost shocked at how long I had been writing about wanting to leave, but never finding the courage. There were moments of guilt too, moments where I wondered if taking it that far was too much. But those moments didn't last, because within a week, it all hit the headlines. Avara Tech under federal investigation for financial fraud and labor exploitation. Former executives face possible criminal charges after whistleblower cooperation. And then it came. My name. Not shouted, not broadcast, but whispered in threads, private messages, quiet emails. People who had once ignored me in the halls were now reaching out in secret. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I wish I had your strength. Some messages brought tears to my eyes, ones from employees I barely knew, people in other departments who had felt the same fear I did, but never had the tools or timing to act. Others just made me mad. Now you care, now you remember. It's wild how the silence of others can feel louder than any words ever spoken. And yet, I didn't lash out. I didn't respond to most. I wasn't angry for the attention. I was just tired. Grateful, but tired. Justice doesn't come with confetti. No parade. No grand applause. Just space. And that space, finally, was mine. A week later, I got a phone call from someone I didn't expect. Julia, the former director of HR who had disappeared months ago. Her number lit up my screen and my heart stuttered. Elodie, she said, you saved more people than you'll ever know. She told me about the internal complaints she had tried to escalate, how she'd been forced out after pushing too hard. She had thought about going public but didn't have the documentation. What you did, she said, voice cracking, tied it all together. That call stayed with me. And then, just like that, the universe cracked open a little wider. I received an invitation from a respected financial ethics organization to speak at a closed session for corporate compliance leaders. They wanted to hear my story, not for drama, but to learn from it. To build better systems, to protect people like me, like us, before they're forced to burn everything down just to be heard. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, rewriting, restoring a piece of the world that had gone crooked while too many looked away. Still, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my next chapter would really look like. I didn't want to be defined by the worst thing that happened to my company, or by the courage it took to expose it. I wanted something simpler, something freer. And slowly, that freedom started to take shape. A former colleague reached out about a role at a new firm, smaller, values-driven, fully transparent. I wasn't sure I wanted to jump back into another office life, but this time, it felt different. They didn't want me despite what I'd done. They wanted me because of it. The office was small, nothing like the glass fortress I had just escaped. No neon logos on the wall, no ping-pong table in the break room. Just soft lighting, quiet hums of focused energy, and the kind of atmosphere that felt human. I didn't know if I belonged here, but I was curious enough to try. My first day at the new firm was gentle. That's the only word I can think of. Gentle. No forced introductions, no pressure to prove my value. Just a quiet welcome from the founder, a woman named Laurel, who looked me in the eye and said, "We're glad you're here. Take your time." No one asked about Avara. No one treated me like a hero, or a threat, or a symbol. And strangely, that was what I needed most. For the first few weeks, I moved slowly, like someone learning to walk again after too many months in survival mode. I checked documents twice, then again, always looking for the hidden trap. I hesitated before asking questions, afraid of being labeled difficult. Old reflexes die hard, but the difference this time was, no one punished me for caring too much. Laurel would nod when I raised concerns. Teams would actually discuss process flaws without deflecting or blaming. And when I once flagged a confusing clause in a vendor contract, a junior analyst leaned over and whispered, "Thanks for catching that. I was afraid to speak up." That sentence landed deep. Afraid to speak up. It reminded me just how common that fear was, how it still lingers in even the healthiest environments, and how easily silence can spread if one voice doesn't break it. So I decided I wouldn't let fear be my compass anymore. Instead, I used what I'd learned at Avara, not just the pain, but the perspective. I started writing quiet policies, drafting gentle guidelines, helping Laurel build what we never had, a system that listens before it has to be screamed at. I wasn't healing by forgetting. I was healing by remembering differently. And with every small change, every safe conversation, every moment I helped someone else feel seen, I felt a little more whole. Not in a perfect movie-ending way, but in the slow, honest way that real life demands. There were still hard days. There were still nights I woke up anxious, dreaming of locked files and dark conference rooms. But they didn't control me anymore. What surprised me most? I started smiling again. Really smiling. Not the practice smile you wear to survive, but the one that comes from stillness, from knowing you've been to hell and back, and now, somehow, you're standing on solid ground again. And then, one Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Laurel walked into my office with a quiet grin. "We're putting together a new leadership team for compliance and culture," she said. "I'd like you to lead it." I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, stunned. Not because I didn't feel ready, but because I finally understood. This wasn't a second chance. This was the life I should have had all along, built not from fear, but from clarity. I accepted the role the following Monday, not out of ambition, but out of something deeper. A promise I had made to myself during those long, lonely nights at Avara. That if I ever got the chance again, I wouldn't just survive the system. I'd help rebuild it. My first act as the new head of compliance and culture wasn't flashy. No announcements, no sweeping policies. Instead, I invited every department, no matter the size, to send one representative to a listening session. No agendas, no pressure, just space. To speak, to be heard, to be human. And people showed up. Quiet at first, guarded. But slowly, stories emerged. Microaggressions no one reported. Burnout that had gone unnoticed. Unclear boundaries. Hidden fears. Patterns I knew all too well, just dressed in a kinder disguise. The difference? This time, they weren't ignored. We didn't fix everything overnight. But we named it. We documented it. We started rewriting the foundation, and that was everything. Some days I still felt the old ache, the shadow of who I'd been before everything broke. But then I'd look around, at the interns who now felt safe enough to speak up, at the managers who asked how to lead with care instead of fear. And I knew, this is what healing can look like. Not just for one person, but for a culture. One afternoon, as I was heading out, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass of the front door. Hair windblown, tired eyes, and a calm I hadn't seen in years. I didn't just look like someone who had survived. I looked like someone who had returned to herself. So many of us are taught that speaking up will cost us everything. And sometimes it does. But silence? That has a cost too. And it's often paid in dignity, self-worth, and years of wondering, what if? If you've ever stood at that same crossroads, between staying silent and standing tall, what did you choose? And if you could go back, would you choose the same? Tell me your story in the comments. Maybe, just maybe, your voice will be the one someone else needed to hear before they gave up. Because sometimes justice starts with a whisper and ends with a voice like yours.